Their father's will had further complicated matters when he divided his property unequally. Most of it went to Remy. Remy pleaded with her mother to allow Bimpe go with her. Bimpe coughed and spluttered, her lungs burning. "You disobedient child," she yelled. "I told you not to take my daughter along." The pain of being referred to as an outcast and the darkness was all she could remember before she slipped into oblivion. It had been 2 weeks since Remy discovered her identity. 2 weeks since she ran away from home, since she was last seen in Okuta. Bimpe had been worried sick, and her mother had cared less. She couldn't eat or drink. Bimpe, who was usually a very bubbly and mischievous person, had become withdrawn and unhappy. This made her mother very angry. "Why are you starving yourself for someone so undeserving?" she asked. "You should be happy she's gone. Our main concern right now should be to make sure she never returns. I, particularly, will make sure of that," said her mother. Bimpe stared at her mother for a while and said nothing. She got up and left. She went round the village asking the villagers if they had seen Remy. Okuta was a very small village, so everyone knew everyone. Nobody had seen Remy since that day they went to the stream to draw water. Bimpe had no idea what to do, so she went home, all the while praying that her sister was safe. Their neighbor Obi and his wife Nneka had advised Adesuwa to find Remy. Adesuwa had told them she had no time for that. After all, she was not the one who chased Remy away from the house. Meanwhile, 2 weeks had passed since Tayo found Remy lying unconscious in the forest. She had gotten better, her fever had subsided, and her leg was healing properly. Tayo and Remy had become very good friends. Remy had never experienced such peace, joy, and laughter. She had known sadness, strife, ill treatment all her life, even when her father was alive. Tayo sold clothes at the village market. He had the biggest clothing store at the market. He had bought some clothes for Remy. Every day, Remy would ask to follow him to the market, but Tayo would refuse. He didn't want people to get the wrong impression. His neighbors had started to gossip, talking about the strange woman in her house. Although Okumeji was a much bigger village than Okuta, everyone knew everyone, and almost everyone in Okumeji knew that Tayo was engaged to be married to Tolu. Tolu was a princess. She was from a long line of royalties. Her ancestors had been on the throne, ruling Okumeji for as long as anyone could remember. Their family was very rich. In fact, they were the richest family in the vicinity. They had single-handedly brought development and progress to Okumeji. Her family was very revered. So when people started to see a strange woman who was not even a villager in Tayo's house, they started to speculate. Tayo was not royalty, but his family was well respected in Okumeji. His father was the headmaster of the biggest primary school in the village, a school established by Tolu's family. Tayo's mother was a midwife at the village clinic. One day, Tayo returned home from business. He sat down with Remy and said, "It is time for you to return home. You've been here long enough. No matter how mean your stepmother has been to you, I believe she is still human and will be worried about your whereabouts." "I've been restless too," said Remy. "I believe she must have learnt a lesson and would want me back home." "Good," said Tayo. "I'm glad you feel that way. You have to find it in your heart to forgive her. And I'm also very sure that your sister Bimpe misses you." At the mention of Bimpe's name, A wide grin came to Remi's lips. Oh, I've missed her so much and can't wait to see her again, she said. There was someone at the door. Remi got up and opened the door. A very beautiful young lady of about 20 years was standing at the door. Remi stared at her. Good day, she said. Tolu stared at her, suspicion written all over her face. She stepped inside without replying Remi's greeting. Tayo stood up. He was surprised because he wasn't expecting her. Remi shut the door. Hello, Tolu. I'm so glad to see you, said Tayo, hugging her. Tolu returned the hug. Hello, Tayo. Nice to see you too. I didn't know you had a visitor. Who is she? This is Remi. She's from Okuta. Tolu turned to Remi, looked at her thoroughly and said, Hello, Remi. What are you doing here in Okumeji? Are you visiting a relative? Remi looked at Tolu, smiled and said, Hello to you too, Tolu. No, I'm not visiting a relative. I ran away from home, had a bit of an accident along my way. Tayo here saved me. Said Tolu. Tayo is a very kind man, and I wouldn't want him to be taken advantage of. Remi smiled again and said, Yes, he is. She looked at Tayo, smiled and said, But you don't have to worry about me. She turned and left the living room. Tolu sat down and said, I've been hearing tales of a strange woman living with you. I came to find out if what they say is true. Tolu, she was running away from Okuta, from her stepmother who has been maltreating her. She fell into my trap. I found her the next morning and couldn't just let her lay there unconscious. By the time I found her, her foot was already swollen. I had no idea who she was. I don't expect you to abandon her there, Tolu interrupted. But she is fully recovered now and should return to her people in Okuta. Surely her family will be searching for her. We've spoken about that, Tayo said. She will return home soon. Bibe was starting to believe that something bad had happened to Remi. She could understand that Remi was upset, but to run away from home and stay away for 3 whole weeks without making her family aware of her whereabouts was not right. Without warning, Bibe went to see her uncle Ojo. He was the only surviving relative from her paternal home. Uncle Ojo was glad to see her. How is your mother doing? He asked. She is well, replied Bimpe. But Uncle Ojo could see that Bimpe was bothered about something. What is the problem, my child? Tell me, what worries you? Bimpe told him of all that had happened. Uncle Ojo was not happy. Why hadn't Remi come to him all this while, he wondered. So you mean for 3 whole weeks, Remi has not been seen? Bimpe nodded. I always knew something was not right with the way Adesuwa, your mother, treated Remi. The family had no idea Oge was pregnant. After my parents objected to the union, Oge was heartbroken. She was the only surviving member of our family. When my brother's relationship with Oge ended, she was heartbroken. She left Okuta and never came back. Your father must have known she was pregnant for him and kept in contact with her. Olu was a very noble man, always wanting to do the right thing. A year after he got married to your mother, he took her and left for the city and returned a year later with a baby. Of course, we all believed your mother had gotten pregnant and given birth in the city. Now it all makes sense. Poor Remi. The next day, Uncle Ojo and other kingsmen came to the house to see Adesuwa. They told her that it was true that Oge was an outcast and that their family rejected her union with their brother, Olu. They also said that they intend to respect Olu's wishes of accepting Remi as a member of their family. Remi has become a part of our family, whether her late mother was an outcast or not, they said. They also said that Remy would keep her part of the inheritance given to her by her father. They said they understood why Olu did what he did. He knew that one day Remy was going to find out the truth about her maternity, and it was important for her to know that she was loved and accepted by her father, and that she was not an outcast by virtue of Olu being her father. Adesuwa apologized to the king's men and promised she would change. The king's men had said they would see the king about the matter so that a search would be conducted to bring Remy back home. The meeting with the king's men had concluded. Adesuwa had presented them with food and drinks. When Remy walked into the compound, a bag slung over her right shoulder, accompanied by a young man. Bimpe, who was sitting outside by the house, was first to see her. She screamed in excitement and hugged her sister. Remy was so glad to see her too. Remy greeted the elders and introduced Tayo as the man who had saved her life when she fell into a trap that night as she ran away from home. The elders thanked him for taking care of Remy and for giving her shelter all the while she was away from home. Remy knelt before her mother, Adesuwa, and apologized for running away. Adesuwa accepted her apology. She also apologized to Remy and asked her for forgiveness regarding the way she had been treating her. Remy could not believe she would ever hear her mother utter those words. Her heart was full of joy. She forgave her mother and hugged her. And so, life went on with Adesuwa, Remy, and Bimpe. Adesuwa no longer treated Remy badly. She treated her the exact same way she treated her biological daughter, Bimpe. Bimpe was glad to have her sister back. She no longer ignored her sister. She wanted to spend time with Remy. Remy, in turn, was glad to be home. She loved the idea of a happy home where everyone was treated nicely. She never, in a million years, thought that it was possible, but it was, and she was living it. Time passed and Remy was happy. Then one day, towards evening, Adesuwa picked up the cutlass and headed for the bush, not too far away from home. Remy took the cutlass from her mother and promised to get the herbs. Adesuwa thanked her and told her the specific ones she wanted, and Remy left. When she got to the bush, she cut two of the plants she wanted and headed far into the bush to find the other plants. Then suddenly, she heard the rustling of leaves behind her, like someone was walking towards her. She turned around and found no one. She thought that she was probably being paranoid. So, she ignored what she was hearing and went along to cut the plants she wanted. Suddenly, she felt a hand to her throat and something was placed on her nose. She tried to scream and breathed in a substance that knocked her out. She woke up moments later and found herself in a very dark room. Her hands and feet were bound behind her and she was gagged. Even if she screamed, no one would hear her, but she continued to and tried to make as much noise as she could. Then she heard a male voice caution her from the room and told her to be quiet. After what seemed like an eternity, she heard footsteps, followed by conversations. She couldn't see a thing in the dark room, but from the sound of their hushed tones, she could tell they were all men. One of the men sat her up on the floor. Another struck a match and lit the lamp. The sudden bright light made her blink a few times. Then her sight finally adjusted to the light in the room. She could see two young men towering above her. She tried to make out their faces one by one. They were faces she wasn't familiar with. The men told her they had been paid to carry out one assignment, which was to end her life. As Remy heard the words and the meaning began to sink in, she started to cry and plead for mercy. Not that she was able to speak, but her gesture and facial expression said it all. In that instant, two more men walked into the room and dragged her out of the room, into the night. They made their way through what felt like a bush as plants kept slapping her skin as they dragged her along. Suddenly, they stopped and came to a place where a large hole had been dug. One of the men brought out a knife, knelt down, and placed it to her neck. It was then Remy saw his face, and he too recognized her. Shocked, he removed her gag, wanting an explanation. The other three men were pissed, but he pleaded with them, explaining that he knew Remy from his benefactor, Tayo. His name was Kunle. Kunle was an orphan. He had two sisters. Tayo's father had taught him in elementary 4 before he became the headmaster. After his parents died, none of his relatives accepted the responsibility of raising him and his sisters. As a young boy of 13, he had to fend for himself and his siblings. He took on the role of a parent and did menial jobs to provide for himself and his siblings. From the streets, he joined the gang and did all sorts of things for money. One time, he had been caught stealing at the market. The case would have been different if not for Tayo, who intervened and saved his life. He had met Remy one time when he accidentally bumped into her and Tayo on the way. He could not bring himself to commit the crime he had been paid for. He owed Tayo his life and would do anything to return the kindness. The men agreed to repay Tayo's kindness for saving the life of their friend, but they made Remy promise not to reveal who they were. Remy happily agreed. That night, Kunle took Remy back to Tayo's house in Okumeji. He told him a cover-up story that he had walked into two men on the Appian Way leading to the market. They had attempted to kill Remy. He said he knew one of the men, but refused to say who he was. He also informed Tayo that according to the men, they had been paid by Remy's stepmother to eliminate her. Tayo felt like the story was not adding up, but he was grateful nevertheless and thanked him. Tayo told Remy to stay back and stay low in Okumeji until a plan was put in place to bring her stepmother to justice. Remy was shattered. What had gone wrong again? She could not understand. Could it have been that her stepmother was pretending to be nice to her, just long enough to put her plan in action and finally get rid of her? She wanted her inheritance so badly, to the extent of taking her life? Words could not convey how shattered Remy was. Meanwhile, back in Okuta, weeks had passed and Remy did not return. The king had ordered a search severally, but Remy was still not found. The king had also sent messengers to Okumeji to find out if Remy was with Tayo, but the messengers had returned to say Tayo had not seen her and that Remy had never visited Okumeji. Bimbe was devastated. Adesuwa pretended to be as well, but life went on. After 4 months and no news or sight of Remy, the king and people of Okuta concluded she was dead and gone, and slowly villagers eased back into their normal lives. Then one day, 6 months after Remy was concluded dead, the king summoned Adesuwa and Bimpe to the palace. Perplexed and wondering why, Bimpe and her mother went to see the king. On arriving at the palace, they met the elders and the king already seated. Adesuwa and Bimpe bowed in greeting to the king and elders. One of the elders cleared his throat, then asked Adesuwa to narrate one more time the story she had told, what really happened on the day Remy was last seen. Adesuwa gave her account of what transpired, how Remy had offered to go to the bush to get herbs for her. At the end of her story, the king introduced two men in mufti who had been listening as well. There were policemen from Okumeji. At that point, Remi and Tayo stepped into the palace. Adesuwa froze, her brain working overtime, trying to process what was about to happen. Shock and doubt registering on her face at the same time. Bimpe was in shock and trying very hard to process what was happening. To think that her mother would go to the extent of taking a life, the life of the very child whom she had raised. She turned, looked at her mother, and for the first time in her life, admitted she had no idea who Adesuwa was. Adesuwa passed out on the floor. The men tried to resuscitate her. They did, and took her away with them, back to Okumeji. Obviously glad she wasn't going to get away easily. Not this time. What did you learn from this story? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you so much for always coming back to listen to my story. I really appreciate this. If you enjoyed watching this video, then please check out another story on my channel. Share with your family and friends, subscribe if you haven't, and don't forget to like this video. It helps our channel to grow.